I'm Enzo from Evolution, the channel that gives you tips to improve your life. Today we are going to talk about the best way to take decisions. How do we take decisions in our life? Of course, I'm not referring to the normal decisions that we take in the everyday life. For instance, what shoes to wear, if we want to have breakfast at home or in some cafe. These are decisions that usually do not have a profound and lasting impact in our life. I am instead talking about decisions that have a long-term impact, the ones that modify our life in the next months of years. First of all, there are a couple of basic observations that apply to all the tips that I'm going to give you. And these are the followings. 1. You have to think. Apply some intelligence. You have to see your situation a little deeper than normal and apply my tips, putting them in the context of your particular case. If you apply an advice without considering your particular case, the advice will not work. Normally, when I help a client to find a solution, the solution comes from himself, not from me. I just guide him to find his way. In this case, however, it's a video addressed to different people. And I don't have any way to establish a continuous feedback with you. So you have to stop a little to think and examine your situation and what tip applies better. The second basic observation that I want to give you is that in 99% of the cases, the best decisions are the ones we take. What does that mean? It means that in many cases we are too lazy to stop thinking, to take notice of that force that from the unconscious presses to surface, and that we do not stop to consider. We just continue doing our usual life, and only when it becomes impossible to sustain the present situation, we actually take a decision. Well, in 99% of the cases, it's better to immediately take a decision. In any case, the decision will have to be taken in the future, so it's better to take it now. Okay, this was the first part of our video, a kind of foundations for the actual tips that I'm going to give you now. Let's get now into the actual tips. The tip number 1 is that we cannot control everything. When you take a decision, you do not have to charge yourself of the heavy burden of changing everything around you. Because there are some things that you just cannot control. There are some things that you can control, things that are under your influence, and things that you cannot control. I will quote a funny joke from Frank Zappa, the musician. In the fight between you and the world, back the world. This means that you cannot change the world, but you can change the way you see the world. For example, most of us cannot change the society in the short term. If we have a principle, a very important principle, an idea, we must embark in a long and difficult journey to affirm this idea in the society. Stick to our principle and have a lot of patience. Nelson Mandela, to quote just one of the most famous cases, managed to change the society by fighting effectively the apartheid. But before that, he was arrested and spent altogether 27 years in jail before becoming president of South Africa in 1994. Now, in those days, we are seeing Greta Thunberg fighting against the climate changing. And through her activism in the international scene, she will probably manage to have a great impact in the world. But this, again, takes time and patience. So all this to say that in 99% of the cases, you cannot change the people around you. You cannot change the society. And you cannot make other people change their mind. So even if we actually can change the world and the society, we cannot do it overnight. But the real topic here is actually that in 99% of the cases, you cannot change the people around you. You cannot make other people change their mind. No one likes to change their mind. And above all, no one likes being told that they are wrong. It's a human nature. We cannot do anything about that. Actually, you can change some people around you, but it requires patience, time, and above all, a mindset, very special mindset, and some psychological skills that not everyone possesses. And actually, I will talk about the necessary skills to deal with people in a couple of my future videos. What you can control, however, is the way you see the world. You can change the filters that your brain applies to your life, to your society, to the conversations that you have around you. By taking some time to look inside yourself, by trying to see what are the forces, the drives, the values, that animate the deepest part of you. You can actually acquire a better consciousness of yourself, and automatically you will start to see the world in a different way. By seeing who you really are, you will discover who other people really are. And your approach to yourself, to others, and of course your approach to life in general will change. This is difficult but possible. It is in your control. For example, many of us take decisions based on what other people want. I take a job because the society wants me to have success. But this is not what my deepest part wants. Maybe what I really want is a contact with nature or with God. The second tip is that sometimes it's better not to think too much and just do it. Sometimes it is likely that we have too many choices. In this case, better take a decision without thinking too much, even though there is a possibility that it would prove wrong in the end. Because the worst case scenario is not to take a decision at all. If we employ too much rationality in a decision, we risk burying what our heart has already decided under a heap of information that it's not really useful. Moreover, even the most intelligent person cannot really forecast the future, because it's too complex. The reality is always more complex than we can forecast. We normally tend to foresee the future by considering what we lived in the past or our emotional state in the present. But the future is, if we do like that, we constrain the future within the boundaries of a projection of the past or of the present. And we actually miss what will really happen, which is always inside the realm of infinite possibilities, which is beyond our ability to forecast it. Now the third tip. If we don't take a decision, others will take the decision for us. In this case, we might feel temporarily relieved because we don't take a decision, but it's actually a pact with the devil because we do a long-term disservice to ourselves. Moreover, we let our life be guided by others. One day, a deep part of you, that force that drives your true self, that you don't know yet, will come afloat in your mind and ask you to give an account of what happened. And you will not have the answer. There could be a case in which you actually get depressed because of that. So it's better to confront yourself now with a decision than waiting too much. Tip number 4. A decision in favor of something is always a decision against something other. This is something we have to accept. There will always be something we will have to give up. It's structural to all the decisions we make. When I decided, for instance, to open the life coach practice, I also decided to give up photography. I love photography. I love portraying people, and I even have an old dark room where I process films. However, I love helping people more. So I took a hard decision because I had to decide against photography. But I chose something even more beautiful. Tip number 5. There is no such thing as a missed opportunity, but only missed decisions. When you miss an important opportunity in your life, it's not because you were unlucky, inefficient, under adverse destiny. This happens all the time. It's normal. It's structural to the personal growth of any person who wants to reach a goal. When you actually miss an opportunity, it is always because you did not take a decision. That's the real missed opportunity. If you take a decision, even when you don't get what you want, it will not be a missed opportunity because you will have at least tried. And in the long term, this bad result will give you the possibility to take better decisions and so get nearer to your goal. So you have to see things in a big perspective on the long run. The tip number 6 is try to understand when you are under pressure. This is a little different from the other tips. Because in some other tips I told you to follow your heart, but in this case actually you have to stop and you have to understand if you are under pressure. Some decisions unfortunately cannot be taken on the spot, cannot be taken like the ones that I told you before, where you do what your hearts command. This is because in particular cases there are too many external noises that prevent clarity in our thinking, and you must be able to recognize when this is the case. Sometimes it is necessary to take time and go through different alternatives. So when you feel like you are under pressure, take your time, Think, put your situation in context. And then, when you feel better, decide. Tip number 7. There are no wrong decisions. This is actually a different way to say what I already stated before. As long as we decide, the decision is correct. Because it is much better to decide than not take decisions at all. Even when the aftermath of a decision proves wrong, it's always a new experience from which we can learn something and take a better decision next time. Tip number 8. You cannot please everybody, but you can please yourself. It means with your decision you cannot please your partner, the group you belong to, your society. No, you have to please yourself because it's an important decision that will involve a lasting part of your life. I always make a joke about that. You are not Nutella, you cannot please everybody. It's a joke that I took from internet. But it's true, you have to please yourself. It's impossible to please everybody. And when you take your decision, it's something that you take for yourself, even when you risk disappointing people around you. I know it's difficult. How many times we just overlook what we feel important for us and take instead decisions that please others? How many times we do that? But this will not only damage us in the long run, but will damage our relationship with the other person as well. Instead, if we take a kind of hard but right decision, this will be a decision aligned with what we are. And the other person will probably in the long run recognize that you took the right decision and your relationship will improve. Tip number 9. A decision is possible only when you overcome the fear of the consequences. You have to consider unpleasant consequences, of course, but also you have to consider that normally we interpret the future, as I said before, as a projection of the past. So it's easy to get stuck in the fear due to a false interpretation of the future. The reality is always too complex to really know in advance what will happen. So many of our fears are actually unjustified. Of course, knowing that our fears are actually unjustified does not make the choice easier. But what actually makes the choice easier is to actually know what causes your fear. If you know it, you can delimit it, control it, put it in a corner and go on in the decision process. Even when you don't manage to totally control your fears, sometimes it's possible, because in this case you just have to take a leap in the dark, because the only choice you have here is to take a decision, because unfortunately the alternative will not be pleasant, because the alternative will be not taking the decision at all. So it's better to take a leap in the dark and take the decision, even when we don't control totally our fears. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and check next week as well for our content on how to improve your life.